My name is Sergeant Maria Gill, and I'm 27 years old. In the Army, they teach you how to face the enemy. But no one teaches you what to do when your greatest enemy is the woman who gave birth to you. I was standing under the relentless Detroit rain at my own father's funeral, posture perfect, a soldier at attention. I was surrounded by hollow condolences, but the most important place beside me was empty. My mother, Tilda, didn't show up. Instead, she'd sent a cold text. Stuck on a business trip in Miami with a partner. You handle the burial. Later, I saw her on social media, hand in hand with that partner, raising champagne glasses on a beach. The caption, "New Horizons Ahead," felt like a bullet straight through my already bleeding heart. She was celebrating on my father's grave, thinking she had won. But she didn't know that in the darkness of Detroit, the dead can send text messages. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe the highest duty is sometimes the war fought against your own blood. The service was held at Woodlawn Cemetery, a historic landmark where the titans of Detroit's auto industry were laid to rest. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and history, the gray drizzling sky weeping over ornate mausoleums and weathered headstones. I stood ramrod straight, my Army service uniform, sharp and immaculate, refusing the offer of an umbrella. I let the cold November rain soak the shoulders of my dress blues, letting the chill seep into my bones. It felt appropriate. It was a physical manifestation of the cold that had settled deep inside me. My posture was a stark, painful contrast, the unwavering discipline of a soldier against the complete chaos of my family. The chaplain's words drifted past me, a low hum blending with the sniffles of a few distant cousins and my father's old business associates. But I wasn't listening. All my senses were focused on the gaping void to my left, the space where my mother, Tilda Gaff, was supposed to be standing. Her absence wasn't just an oversight, it wasn't carelessness. To me, a soldier, it was an act of desertion. It was a conscious abandonment of her post, a public and profound dishonor to the man who had been her husband for 30 years. She had deserted the family ranks in its darkest hour, and in doing so, had declared war on his memory. I kept my chin up, my gaze fixed on the mahogany casket, my jaw so tight it ached. This was my duty now. I would see him off with the honor his own wife denied him. After the last handful of dirt was thrown, after the final, awkward pat on my shoulder, I drove back to the house in Grosse Pointe. The sprawling brick colonial, usually filled with the sound of my father's booming laugh or the classical music he loved, was suffocatingly silent. It felt like a tomb, everything preserved exactly as he had left it, yet devoid of life. I walked through the familiar rooms, my boots echoing on the polished hardwood floors. The air still held the faint scent of his pipe tobacco and Old Spice aftershave, ghosts of a life abruptly ended. I sat on the edge of the leather sofa in the living room, the one he always sat on to watch the Lions lose on Sundays. The silence was a crushing weight. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over the Instagram app. It was a masochistic impulse, but I needed confirmation. I needed the intelligence report. And there it was, an irrefutable asset delivered straight from the enemy's own hand. The picture screamed from my screen, a garish splash of color against the grayness of my world. Tilda, radiant in a crisp white sundress, was laughing, her head thrown back in carefree joy. Beside her stood Yale Maff, his arm possessively around her waist, a smug grin plastered on his face. They were on a sun-drenched beach in Miami, crystal-clear turquoise water behind them. In their hands were flutes of sparkling champagne, bubbles catching the light. The caption beneath it read, "New Horizons Ahead." The pain didn't come as a flood of tears. I was trained to control my emotional response in the field, to compartmentalize. The grief was still there, a hard, dense mass in my chest. But this was different. This was rage. It wasn't a hot, explosive anger, but a cold, sharp fury that settled deep in my gut. I began to analyze the photo like I would a satellite image of a target location. Tilda's smile wasn't one of happiness, it was one of triumph. Yale's wasn't affection, it was ownership. This wasn't a business trip, it was a victory celebration. And they were toasting on my father's grave. My body was trembling, a slight, almost imperceptible tremor running through me. I needed a distraction, something to ground me. The house was cold, so I walked into my father's study, hoping to feel some lingering warmth of his presence. Instead, the cold intensified. My eyes were immediately drawn to the wall above his oak desk. The spot where their wedding portrait had hung for as long as I could remember was now a stark, empty space, marked only by a single, naked nail. My blood ran cold. I scanned the room, my heart pounding a heavy, tactical rhythm against my ribs. My gaze fell on the wastebasket tucked under the desk. There it was. The ornate silver frame lay among discarded envelopes and old newspapers. The glass was shattered into a spiderweb of cracks. And the photograph itself? It had been ripped clean in half, separating my father's smiling face from my mother's. Tilda hadn't even waited for the dirt to settle on his coffin to begin erasing him from her life. This was worse than her absence, worse than the celebratory photo. This was an act of annihilation, a calculated effort to wipe his very existence from history. The rage inside me solidified. The carefully constructed discipline I relied on began to crack. I felt like I was navigating a minefield where every cherished memory was now rigged to explode into another lie, another betrayal. How long had this been going on? How much of my family's life had been a carefully constructed facade? I sank into his desk chair, the leather creaking under my weight, and stared into the darkness of the room, feeling utterly alone on enemy soil. Hours passed. The house remained dark, silent. It was well past midnight when my phone, resting on the desk, vibrated with a sharp buzz. The screen lit up the room. It was a text message from a number I hadn't seen in years, a number I thought had been disconnected forever. My father's old cell. My soldier's instincts took over instantly. My first reaction wasn't hope, it wasn't fear, it was pure, unadulterated suspicion. This is a trap. The thought was immediate and clear. A psychological tactic. The enemy was trying to manipulate me, to throw me off balance, but the message was too direct, too absurd to be a simple trick. 2 short sentences that defied all logic. Dad is alive. Get to the cemetery now. I read it again, and again. It was a direct order, an impossible command. My training warred with the desperate, childish hope of a daughter who had just buried her father. Could it be real? Or was this Tilda's next move, a cruel game to break me completely? But hesitation is a luxury a soldier can't afford. Doubt gets you killed. I stood up, the chair scraping against the floor. There was no more time for grief or anger. I was no longer a mourning daughter. I was a soldier who had just received a command. I moved with purpose through the dark house. I went to my go bag, retrieved my Sig Sauer P320, and did a quick, practiced safety check. The cool, heavy weight of the steel in my hand was strangely comforting. I grabbed the keys to my Ford F-150 from the hook by the door and slipped out into the cold, damp Detroit night. This was no longer a visit home. This was a reconnaissance mission. And I was going to get answers. I killed my headlights a quarter-mile out from Woodlawn's main gate, coasting the final stretch in near silence. I parked my F-150 behind a dense thicket of overgrown shrubs on a side street. The night was moonless, the drizzle having thickened into a damp fog that swallowed sound and light. Perfect cover. I moved on foot, my senses on high alert, every rustle of leaves catalogued and assessed. I navigated the rows of graves like a ghost, my combat boots silent on the wet grass. My hand rested on the grip of my Sig Sauer under my jacket. My mind raced with tactical assessments, ambush points, sight lines, escape routes. I found the designated meeting spot, a massive, ornate mausoleum. I took up a defensive position behind a thick stone angel, its wings providing cover, and I waited. Minutes stretched. Then, a shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness. It was a familiar silhouette, but I held my ground. The figure was taller than me, slightly stooped, moving with hesitation. As he stepped into a patch of faint, ambient light, I saw his face. It was my father, Upton Gaff. Thinner, grayer, but him. Still, I didn't move. I kept my distance, needing to verify. "What's the password?" I asked, my voice a low, steady whisper. It was an old joke between us, from a simpler time. The figure flinched, then sagged with relief. His voice, when it came, was hoarse and trembling. "Maria, honey, you still owe me dinner at Slow's BBQ." That was it. The dam of my military discipline broke. In that instant, I was just a daughter. I closed the distance and threw my arms around him. He felt fragile, all sharp angles and trembling shoulders. He buried his face in my hair, a suppressed sob shuddering through his body. That hug was everything, a reunion, a confirmation of life, and an unspoken declaration that our war had just begun. He pulled away, wiping his eyes. "We have to go. My car's hidden a few blocks over. It's not safe here." His car was a beat-up, 20-year-old Buick sedan. Anonymous. Perfect. The moment the doors were locked and we were moving, he started his emergency intel briefing. "It's been going on for months, Maria," he began, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Tilda and Yale, they've been orchestrating a campaign to break me." He told me about the constant pressure, the subtle gaslighting, the lost documents, and the mounting financial strain. Then it escalated. Forged emails, fake contracts with Yale's shell corporations, all designed to bleed his interior design company dry and make him seem incompetent. The cold fury I'd felt earlier began to burn. I listened in silence as he detailed their final, brutal act. The stress, it finally got to me. I had a minor heart attack 2 weeks ago, landed me in the hospital. He took a shaky breath. Tilda showed up at my bedside. I thought she was worried. He laughed, a bitter, broken sound. She wasn't carrying flowers. She was carrying a stack of legal documents an inch thick. Powers of attorney, transfer of ownership deeds. She shoved a pen in my hand and just looked at me. No emotion. She said, "Sign it, Upton. You're dying anyway. At least do something useful." I closed my eyes, the image searing itself into my brain. The sheer calculated cruelty of it was breathtaking. My own mother. He was still talking when his eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. His body tensed. "Maria, we've got a tail." My head snapped up. My focus shifted instantly from daughter to soldier. Identify. Black SUV, 7 o'clock, been with us for 3 blocks. I glanced back. A newer model Lincoln Navigator, dark windows. They were maintaining a steady distance, trying to look casual. Amateurs. "Okay, Dad, listen to me and do exactly as I say. We're going on the offensive." My voice was calm, authoritative. "Next intersection, take a left, get in the middle lane." Left, middle lane, got it. He'll follow. As soon as the light ahead turns yellow, accelerate through it, then slam on the brakes right after you clear the intersection. Force him to choose, run the red or get stuck. He nodded, his jaw set. We shot through the yellow light, and he stomped on the brake. Tires screeched behind us. The Navigator swerved violently, its driver caught by surprise, forced to run the red light. A chorus of angry horns erupted as it careened through the intersection. "He's exposed. Now we disappear," I commanded. "Right turn now, into that alley." I was leaning forward, my knowledge of Detroit's streets returning. We were in Hamtramck, a dense neighborhood perfect for evasion. Second left, another right. Follow this street until it dead ends, then cut through that gas station parking lot. He followed every command, his nervous driving transforming into focused action. I had turned my father into a getaway driver. We wove through the dark, narrow streets, making a series of unpredictable turns. I checked our 6. The black SUV was gone. We were clear. The immediate danger had passed, but the encounter confirmed it. This was real. My dad pulled over to the curb, his chest heaving. "My God, Maria, how did you know how to do all that?" A small, weary smile touched my lips. "Remember Dwayne, the Rock Johnson, Dad?" He looked at me, confused. "The movie star?" "Yeah, he once said, 'Success isn't always about greatness, it's about consistency. Consistent hard work, leads to success. That's all this was. I'm not some super spy. I just consistently analyzed the situation, broke it down into steps, and executed. They panicked. We didn't. We plan. We execute. We win. He stared at me for a long moment, a new respect in his eyes. Then he nodded slowly. Okay, Sergeant Gill. What's our next move? The question hung in the air. We had won the skirmish, but the war was just beginning. We were exposed, and the enemy knew it. We needed a secure location, a base of operations. We needed a real plan. If you've ever had to be the strong one for a parent, if you've ever had to switch roles and become their protector, please support this story with a like. And in the comments below, just type one word: protector. Let's see how many of us are out there. My father drove with a newfound purpose, navigating the dark, rain-slicked streets of Detroit away from the main thoroughfares. Our destination was a place I hadn't thought about in years: the Packard Automotive Plant. To most Detroiters, it was a ruin, a 3.5 million square foot monument to industrial decay, its thousands of shattered windows staring out like vacant eyes over the city, a place for urban explorers and graffiti artists. But as we approached its looming skeletal frame, I understood. For our purposes, it was the perfect safe house. It was vast, a labyrinth of concrete and steel, completely off the grid and ignored by modern surveillance. My dad pulled the old Buick through a collapsed section of chain-link fence and killed the engine. The sudden silence was absolute, broken only by the dripping of water somewhere deep inside the colossal structure. "Come on," he said, his voice a whisper. I prepared a place. He led me through a maze of debris-strewn corridors and cavernous assembly rooms where forgotten machinery rusted in the darkness. He stopped at a heavy steel door in what looked like an old foreman's office, a door he had clearly reinforced himself with a new deadbolt. He unlocked it, and we stepped inside. The space was small but secure. A few battery-powered lanterns cast a warm, steady glow over a makeshift living area. There were 2 cots, a small propane stove with a kettle on it, and a cooler. The air was thick with the strangely comforting smell of old machine oil, damp concrete, and dust. It wasn't a home, but it was a fortress. While my dad got the stove going, my training took over. I immediately began a perimeter check, my soldier's mind assessing the space for tactical advantages and vulnerabilities. I noted the 2 potential exits, the reinforced door, and the thickness of the concrete walls. I was turning this forgotten corner of industrial ruin into our forward operating base. A woman was already there, sitting calmly on one of the cots. She looked to be in her late 50s, with intelligent, kind eyes and a presence of unshakable composure. She stood as we entered and gave my father a brief, supportive hug. This was Dr. Veda Jaff, a renowned cardiologist and one of my father's oldest and most trusted friends. She was our inside asset. She turned to me, her expression a mixture of sympathy and resolve. "Maria, it's good to see you, though I wish it weren't under these circumstances." Dr. Jaff began her briefing with the cool precision of a surgeon outlining a procedure. She explained how Tilda's arrogance had been their greatest advantage. "Your mother was supremely overconfident," Veda said, her voice even. "She called the morgue only once, a brief call just to confirm that the body had been transferred. She never came to the hospital to identify him. She never laid eyes on her husband one last time. Tilda's cold negligence had created the opening Veda needed. She had exploited that blind spot with tactical genius. We used a medical mannequin, weighted to match your father's exact body weight, and wrapped it for transport," she explained. "I altered the digital records, signed the death certificate myself, citing massive cardiac arrest. Then, during the shift change when the corridors were busiest, I wheeled your father out through a staff exit to a waiting car. No one even glanced our way." Her actions were more than just helping a friend in need. This was an act of civil disobedience, a deliberate subversion of the system in the name of justice. I looked at Dr. Jaff, and the respect I felt was immense. It was the same respect a soldier feels for a fellow warrior who has demonstrated extraordinary courage under fire. She was one of us. "Doctor," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "you took an incredible risk. your career, your freedom. Why? Veda's calm expression softened into a sad smile. She looked from me to my father. 30 years ago, my family came to this country from India with nothing but the clothes on our backs and a few dollars in my father's pocket. No one would hire him. He was educated, a master craftsman, but his accent was thick and his skin was brown. She paused, her gaze distant with memory. Your father, Upton, was the only one. He gave my dad a job in his woodworking shop. He didn't just give him a paycheck, Maria. He gave him his dignity. Tilda, on the other hand, she always looked at us with disdain, like we were something she had to tolerate. She never saw us as people. She looked directly at me then, her dark eyes shining with conviction. So, you see, this wasn't a choice for me. This was paying a debt of honor. My father taught me that family isn't who you celebrate with, it's who you fight with. Your father fought for my family's dignity then. I am fighting for his life now. Her words hit me with the force of a physical blow. They resonated in the empty spaces of my heart, affirming that loyalty, goodness, and honor did exist in the world. They just didn't come from the person I was supposed to expect them from. This woman, bound by a debt of honor from a generation ago, was more family to my father than the wife who had shared his bed for 3 decades. Just as that thought settled, a loud vibration cut through the quiet of our makeshift command center. It was my official phone, the one everyone had the number for, buzzing on the small table. I picked it up, a text message from Tilda. My blood ran cold as I read the words, her voice echoing in my head with its sickeningly sweet, manipulative tone. Maria, honey, I know you're grieving. It must be so hard for you. But we need to talk about your father's will and the transfer of his assets. Meet me at the house tomorrow. The message was a masterclass in psychological warfare, feigning concern while revealing her true, greedy intentions. It was also the signal we had been waiting for. The enemy was making her move. My father looked at me, his expression no longer that of a victim, but of a commander. His eyes were clear and resolute. This is it, Maria. This is our opening. He looked at me, not as his daughter, but as his most vital field agent. You have to go. Go to the house. Play the part of the grieving daughter. Observe, listen, gather intelligence. Find out what they know, what they're planning. He put his hand on my shoulder, his grip firm. You are the eyes and ears of this operation now. I looked from his determined face to the cold, calculating words on my phone screen. There was no hesitation. I gave a single, sharp nod. My mission parameters were clear. Reconnaissance was officially a go. The next day, I drove into Grosse Pointe. The perfectly manicured lawns and stately homes felt alien, like a pristine movie set for a life I no longer recognized. Before pulling into the driveway, I took a deep breath, compartmentalized my rage, and put on my mask. I adjusted my features into an expression of controlled grief, a skill perfected in the field. On my phone, tucked in my purse, the audio recorder was already running. I walked up to the front door of the house I once called home. It felt cold, sterile. All of my father's warmth had been stripped from it. There were no pictures of him, no sign he had ever existed. Tilda opened the door before I could ring the bell. She was dressed in an expensive cream-colored cashmere dress, her face a perfect portrait of concerned sorrow. Maria, my darling girl, she said, pulling me into a hug. It was like being embraced by a marble statue, all form, no warmth. The scent of her Chanel No. 5 perfume was cloying. I've been so worried about you. I allowed myself to be led into the living room, murmuring something non-committal. I was now behind enemy lines. My mission was active. My mind went into intelligence-gathering mode. While Tilda spoke, my eyes conducted a visual sweep. I noted the small security cameras tucked into the corners of the ceiling. One in the foyer, one here. I logged the potential exits, front door, back patio, windows. Yale was there too, sitting in my father's favorite armchair like he owned it, giving me a slick, sympathetic smile that didn't reach his eyes. Tilda launched into a monologue about how difficult this all was, but how we needed to be practical for the future of the company. As she spoke, I noticed a subtle tick. Her eyes would dart for a fraction of a second toward my father's study, specifically toward a large landscape painting on the far wall. It was a fleeting, almost imperceptible glance, but to a trained observer, it was a signal flare. She was guarding something in that direction. I filed it away. "We found these papers your father signed a few weeks ago," Tilda said, gesturing to a sleek leather portfolio. Yale opened it and pushed it toward me. "It simplifies everything. It transfers his controlling shares to me. It's what he wanted." I picked up the papers, my movements deliberately slow. I scanned the dense legal text, then executed my first planned probe. I stopped at the final page. "Dad's signature," I began, my voice quiet, laced with feigned confusion. "It looks strange." It was a calculated risk. The effect was immediate. Tilda's perfectly composed face tightened for a split second. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "Your father was very weak when he signed it. His hands were shaking." Yale leaned forward, placing a hand on the documents. "It's all legally sound, Maria. You don't need to worry about the details." Their defensive reaction was confirmation. The documents were forgeries. I had my first piece of concrete evidence. I needed to see that study. Could I use the restroom?" I asked, my voice small. "Of course, darling," Tilda said, waving a dismissive hand. I stood and walked toward the hallway, my path taking me directly past the open doors of my father's study. The room was just as I'd found it, the empty space on the wall, the scent of his pipe tobacco, now tainted by Yale's cologne. The painting Tilda kept glancing at was a serene Michigan landscape of pictured rocks. It was beautiful, but my focus wasn't on the art. An old quote from General George S. Patton echoed in my head. "If everyone is thinking alike, then somebody isn't thinking." Anyone else would look at the painting. I looked at what was behind it. My eyes traced the edges of the heavy frame, and there it was. A faint, almost invisible seam in the wallpaper, a perfect rectangle just slightly larger than the painting. A wall? Safe. My heart gave a single, hard thump. That was it. The enemy's arsenal. The real documents, the hard drives, the evidence they wouldn't dare keep on a cloud server, would be in there. The primary objective of my next mission had just been identified. I continued to the restroom, splashed cold water on my face, and composed myself. When I returned, I was the perfect image of a daughter overwhelmed. I told them I needed time to think. Tilda and Yale exchanged a look of smug satisfaction. They thought I was broken, pliable. I left the mansion and drove straight downtown, the audio file already saved and encrypted. My destination was American Coney Island. The place was loud, crowded, and smelled of grilled onions and chili, perfect cover for a clandestine meeting. My cousin Walt, our tech support, was already there, hunched over a booth halfway through a Coney dog. Walt was a genius, a white hat hacker who ran a successful cybersecurity firm. He was also the only family member, besides my father, that I trusted. I slid into the booth opposite him. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I placed my phone on the sticky tabletop and slid it across. "Here's the audio from the meeting," I said, my voice low. "They're using forged documents." I grabbed a napkin and a pen. "But more importantly, here's a rough schematic of my dad's study." I quickly sketched the room, marking the desk, windows, and the wall with the painting. I drew an X behind it. "There's a wall safe here. I need to get inside. They're guarding the hard evidence in there. I know it." Walt took a final bite, wiped his mouth, and looked at my crude drawing. He didn't question me. He just nodded. "Security system?" "Standard residential. Cameras in the foyer and living room. Motion sensors on the ground floor." "Easy," he said, a confident glint in his eye. "I can loop the camera feeds and bypass the sensors from my van. Getting you in is no problem." I looked him straight in the eye. "I need everything in that safe, Walt. We have one shot at this." He crumpled up the napkin. "Then let's not waste it." He leaned in, his voice dropping even lower. "They're probably heading out for a celebratory dinner tonight. That's our window." Our operational briefing was short, efficient, conducted over a Detroit classic. The plan was set, the target was identified. I looked at my cousin, our silent pact sealed. Tonight, we were going back in. At 11 p.m., Tilda and Yale's Mercedes pulled out of the driveway. Walt, parked 3 blocks away in his unassuming work van, confirmed it via a traffic cam feed. They're gone, heading downtown. You are green to go. My infiltration began. Dressed in black tactical pants and a dark hoodie, I moved through the shadows of the Grosse Pointe neighborhood like a wraith. The manicured lawns and sculpted hedges provided ample cover. I approached the house from the rear, staying low, my eyes scanning for any unexpected variables. Walt's voice crackled softly in my earpiece, a calm presence in the tense silence. Perimeter alarm system is on a loop. You're invisible to it. The camera on the back patio has a 4-second blind spot every 60 seconds. On my mark. I crouched behind a large oak tree at the edge of the lawn, my heart pounding a steady, controlled rhythm. I watched the camera pan back and forth. 3, 2, 1. Mark. I exploded from my cover, sprinting across the open lawn. 4 seconds. My boots barely seemed to touch the grass. I reached the shadows of the house just as the camera began its sweep back. I was in. The target was a small basement window, partially obscured by a thick azalea bush. It wasn't a skill they teach you at Fort Benning, but I'd learned a thing or two from some old friends in Detroit. I pulled out a slim leather case containing a set of professional lockpicks. The lock on the window was cheap, standard residential grade. It clicked open in under 30 seconds. I slid the window up, slipped through the opening headfirst, and landed in a silent crouch on the cold concrete floor of the basement. The air was stale, filled with the scent of dust and my mother's expensive perfume, which had somehow permeated every corner of the house. It made my stomach churn. I was now inside the wire. I moved up the stairs and through the silent house, my steps light and practiced. I navigated the familiar layout, now an enemy stronghold, and entered my father's study. The room was dark, the only light a faint glow from the city outside. I went straight to the painting of pictured rocks and carefully lifted it off its hook, setting it silently on the floor. The faint outline of the wall safe was exactly where I'd seen it. "Okay, Walt, I'm at the objective," I whispered into the small mic on my collar. "Copy that," he replied. "It's a digital keypad, 6 digits. Start with the obvious: anniversaries, birthdays." I keyed in Tilda's birthday. Error. Yale's birthday. Error. Their wedding anniversary. Error. I felt a spike of frustration. This was wasting time. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to think. Think like Dad. Tilda and Yale were arrogant, self-absorbed. My father, Upton, was sentimental. He remembered the small things, the moments that mattered to him. Tilda wouldn't have set the code. Yale was too flashy for something subtle. But my dad, he would have set it to something meaningful, long ago, and they probably never bothered to change it. An idea sparked in my mind, a long shot. "Walt," I whispered. "What's my birthday? Month, day, year?" He read back the 6 digits. My fingers flew over the keypad, punching in the numbers. There was a soft click, and the heavy steel door of the safe swung open. For a moment, I just stared, a lump forming in my throat. The irony was suffocating. In all their meticulous, cruel planning, in their utter self-obsession, they had overlooked the one thing my father cherished. They had forgotten about me. And that arrogance was about to be their undoing. I shook it off. No time for emotion. Inside the safe was a treasure trove, stacks of documents, financial statements, and a single, black flash drive. That was the prize. I grabbed everything, but the flash drive was my priority. I pulled a small portable data cloner from my pocket and plugged the drive in. A small screen lit up, and a progress bar appeared. Data transfer initiated. As the percentage slowly climbed, my eyes scanned the room one last time. And then I saw it. On the security system's main keypad, mounted on the wall near the door, a tiny single LED light was blinking red. A slow, steady pulse. It wasn't the main alarm. It was something else. Walt's voice suddenly screamed in my ear, sharp with panic. "Maria! Silent alarm. They must have a secondary trigger on the safe. Private security is en route. ETA 3 minutes. Abort. Get out now. My blood went ice cold. I looked at the cloner in my hand. The progress bar was at 90%. 3 minutes. That was a lifetime, or no time at all. My mind presented the options with brutal clarity. Abort the mission now, escape with 90% of the intel, and live to fight another day. Or stay for 10 more seconds, 10 agonizingly long seconds, to get everything, risking capture and the failure of the entire operation. Every instinct, every ounce of my training screamed at me to pull the plug and run. But the image of my father's face, the sound of Tilda's triumphant laughter, flashed in my mind. 90% wasn't enough. We needed it all. I gripped the device tighter, my knuckles white. Negative, Walt, I ordered, my voice a low, steady command that defied the thunder of my own heart. Hold your position. I'm getting it all. The final seconds crawled by like hours. 95%. The distant wail of a siren started, growing closer. 98%. My muscles were coiled, ready to spring. 99%. 100%. Data transfer complete, Walt yelled. I didn't wait. I ripped the drives apart, shoved everything into my pack, and slammed the safe door shut. I hung the painting back on the wall, making it look untouched. I was a blur of motion, retracing my steps out of the study, down to the basement, and through the window. I sprinted back across the lawn just as the bright headlights of a private security vehicle swung onto the street, sweeping across the front of the house. I dove into Walt's van, and he hit the gas before my door was even fully closed. We sped away into the night, melting back into the anonymity of the city. We had made it by seconds. We were on the I-94 freeway, putting miles between us and Grosse Pointe, when my phone rang. It was the burner phone, the one only 3 people had the number for. But the caller ID was Tilda's name. My heart hammered against my ribs. I answered, putting it on speaker. Before I could say a word, her voice, stripped of all its fake sweetness, hissed through the phone. It was a sound of pure, venomous rage. "What did you do?" she shrieked. "What did you take from my house? I'm going to kill you, you little bitch. I swear to God, I will kill you." The line went dead. Walt and I looked at each other in the dim light of the van. The threat was terrifying. But the raw panic in her voice, that was the sweetest confirmation of victory I could have ever imagined. Operation Nightshade was a success. We had breached the enemy's fortress and stolen their ammunition, and now they knew it. The aftermath of the break-in was a relentless psychological assault. Tilda didn't call the police. She knew that would expose her own crimes. Instead, she chose a more personal form of terror. My phone became a weapon used against me, a constant barrage of calls from blocked numbers and a flood of text messages, each one more venomous than the last. They were filled with threats, accusations, and twisted pleas. For 2 days, I ignored them, focusing on the data Walt was decrypting. But the endless buzzing was like a drill boring into my skull. I realized she wouldn't stop. She was trying to wear me down, to break me psychologically. I decided I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. It was time to face her, but on my terms. I sent her a simple text. "Meet me, 1 hour." I chose a neutral location, a busy, sterile coffee shop in Midtown Detroit, a place with bright lights, lots of windows, and plenty of witnesses, a place where her brand of violence, the kind that thrived in shadows and whispers, would be out of place. She arrived exactly on time, a storm cloud in a designer coat. The mask of the grieving widow was gone, replaced by a face contorted with raw, undisguised fury. She didn't even bother with a greeting. She slid into the chair opposite me, her knuckles white as she gripped her purse. "What did you take?" she hissed, her voice a low, dangerous growl. The question was a demand, an accusation. "Give it back, Maria. You have no idea what you're doing. You're destroying everything. You're destroying your brother's future. You're destroying my future." I just looked at her, my face a blank canvas. I didn't say a word. I let her poison fill the air between us. She didn't ask how I was coping. She didn't mention the father she had pretended to mourn. Her entire world had been reduced to a single, frantic concern. Her money, her plan. My silence seemed to infuriate her more than any argument could. Her face flushed a dark, ugly red. "Say something, damn it," she snapped, leaning across the small table. When I still didn't respond, something inside her broke. The last vestiges of a mother, if there ever were any, evaporated, leaving behind something purely monstrous. "You know what?" she said, her voice dripping with a lifetime of resentment. "From the day you were born, I knew you were a mistake. Always so quiet, so serious, so goddamn difficult. Nothing like anyone else in this family." Her words were surgical strikes, aimed at the oldest, deepest wounds she herself had inflicted. "Your father always took your side. His weird little girl who liked playing with toy soldiers more than dolls. This family would have been so much happier without you. All the trouble, all the goddamn stress. It started with you." Each word was a physical blow. I could feel the disciplined armor I'd spent my entire adult life building begin to crack and fall away. She wasn't just angry about a flash drive. She was unloading decades of bitterness, using my father's death as an excuse to finally say what she'd always believed. And in that moment, I wasn't Sergeant Gill, the calm, tactical soldier. I was that 10-year-old girl again, standing silently while she praised my brother, Brent, for his mediocre report card and ignored the academic award I was holding in my hand. I was the teenager who made the varsity soccer team, only to hear her complain about having to drive me to practice. That was it. That was the final straw. For the first time in my life, the silence broke. The carefully contained rage, the years of swallowed pain, erupted. I looked her directly in the eye, and the woman who had always seen me as small and insignificant finally saw the soldier she had created. My voice didn't shout. It was low, trembling with a fury so profound it was almost calm, but it cut through the coffee shop's cheerful background music like a razor. "Did you ever once see me as your daughter?" I asked. "Or was I just a failed investment compared to your golden boy, Brent?" Tilda recoiled, genuinely shocked that I had spoken back. "You didn't just kill my father," I continued, the words pouring out, each one a declaration of independence. "You've been killing my spirit for 27 years. Every time you compared me to him, every time you dismissed me, every time you chose him over me, every single time you chipped away at me, hoping I'd just disappear." I leaned forward, closing the distance between us, my gaze pinning her to her seat. "But you know what? It didn't work. You failed. The game is over. All your little lies, your manipulations, they're done." I took a deep, shuddering breath, the words tasting like freedom and ash in my mouth. "I am not your daughter anymore. I am your opponent. And I will not stop until you have paid for every single thing you have done." I stood up, my chair scraping harshly against the floor. Tilda just stared at me, her mouth slightly agape, for once in her life, utterly speechless. I turned my back on her without another word and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving her alone in the wreckage she had created. I stepped out into the biting Detroit air and took the deepest breath of my life. It didn't feel like relief. It felt like a painful amputation. I had just severed the final toxic cord that bound me to her. It hurt, but it was a clean cut. For the first time, I was truly free. I got in my car and my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer force of the emotional release. I picked up the burner phone and dialed my father's number. He answered on the first ring. "Dad," I said, my voice hoarse. I confronted her. "It's done." There was a pause on the other end. "What's the next phase of the plan? I'm ready. Let's end this." This wasn't just an argument. This wasn't a family squabble. It was a sworn oath. The mission was no longer just about justice for my father. It had become a battle for my own soul. And it was a battle I intended to win. If you've ever had to be the one to finally say, "Enough is enough," and draw that painful line in the sand, please hit the like button for every single person who has found that strength. And in the comments, just write "no more." 2 simple words for a lifetime of meaning. Back in the cold, concrete sanctuary of the Packard plant, the air was thick with tension. The emotional storm from my confrontation with Tilda had passed, leaving behind a cold, hard resolve. There was no more room for grief or personal pain. It was time to weaponize the truth. All eyes were on Walt as he plugged the flash drive we'd risked everything for into a heavily encrypted laptop. The screen lit up, and file directories bloomed like malignant flowers. What we found was far worse than we could have ever imagined. It wasn't just corporate fraud, it was a meticulous blueprint for a man's destruction. There were the forged contracts, routing millions from my father's company into offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands registered to shell corporations under Yale's name. There were scanned copies of the fraudulent legal documents Tilda had tried to force on me. But then we found the emails. My stomach clenched as I read the cold, clinical exchanges between my mother and her lover. They discussed my father's heart condition in chilling detail. One email from Yale read, "We could increase the dosage on his beta blockers. It would slow his heart rate down gradually. No one would suspect a thing." Tilda's reply was even more monstrous. "Let's see if the stress works first. A natural solution is always cleaner." They were actively plotting to murder him, not in a fit of passion, but with the detached calculation of a business transaction. The final exhibit was an audio file. Walt clicked play, and Yale's smug voice filled our small command center. He was laughing, a cruel, self-satisfied sound. "Don't worry so much, Tilda," he chuckled. "The old man won't last the winter. One way or another, he'll be out of our hair by Christmas." The recording ended, plunging the room into a heavy silence. I looked at my father. He was sitting perfectly still on his cot, his face ashen, his eyes fixed on the laptop screen. He looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes, listening to the casual, cheerful plotting of his own murder by the woman he had once loved. A silent fury, colder and harder than anything I had ever felt, settled in my core. This was no longer just about money or betrayal. This was about stopping a pair of killers. We all knew we couldn't just walk into a Detroit police precinct with this. Tilda and Yale were well connected. They had money, influence, and expensive lawyers. They could bury this evidence, claim it was falsified, or tie us up in legal battles for years. We needed to operate with surgical precision. We needed a bigger gun. It was Veda who took the next step, her calm demeanor a steadying force in the room. "I have a contact," she said quietly. "In the FBI, a senior agent in the white-collar crime division. I've worked with him on a few complex medical fraud cases. He's meticulous, and he's trustworthy." This was our OPSEC, our operational security plan. Veda used a secure, encrypted email service from a burner laptop Walt had prepared. She composed a short, anonymous message to the agent. It contained no names, no locations. It simply offered a single damning quote from one of the emails and a promise to deliver a complete, uncompromised data package detailing a multi-million-dollar fraud and conspiracy to commit murder case, in exchange for guaranteed witness protection and a swift, decisive federal response. It was a high-risk gambit, but it was our only move. She sent the email, and the first chess piece was placed on the board. Now, we needed the trap. We had to get Tilda and Yale into a controlled environment where the FBI could apprehend them with the evidence in their hands. My father, who had been silent until now, finally spoke, his voice raspy but firm. "Tilda is panicking," he said, his mind clearly turning from victim to strategist. "She knows you took something, Maria, but she doesn't know what. Her imagination will be her worst enemy. We'll use that." The idea for the bait began to form. "We make her believe you took the wrong thing," he continued. "Something that incriminates Yale even more directly than it does her. Something that makes her think you have leverage she can't control." He described an old, leather-bound ledger he used to keep in the early days of his business. A book that didn't actually exist, but sounded plausible. "We'll tell her you found my old black book, a record of off-the-books cash deals from years ago. Deals that could implicate Yale in tax evasion long before he even met Tilda." The plan was brilliant in its simplicity. It played directly into their greed and paranoia. I would be the bait. I would call Tilda not as the defiant opponent from the coffee shop, but as the terrified daughter, in over her head and looking for a way out. The final piece was choosing the battlefield. It had to be a location that was isolated, easily controlled, and where a federal tactical team could set up undetected. The answer was right here, all around us, the Packard plant. It was perfect. With the plan in place, it was time for my performance. I took a deep breath, pictured myself as that scared, overwhelmed daughter they wanted me to be, and dialed Tilda's number. She answered on the first ring, her voice a tense whisper. "What do you want?" I forced a tremor into my own voice. I made a mistake," I stammered, letting a sob catch in my throat. "I took something from the safe, an old black book of Dad's. It's got names and numbers in it. I think it's about old cash jobs. I don't want any part of this. I don't want to go to the police." There was a sharp intake of breath on her end. I could hear her mind racing, processing the new information, the new threat. "I just want out," I pleaded. "I just want to be left alone. Meet me. Bring money. You can have the book, and you'll never see me again." I could almost hear the gears of greed and panic turning in her head. She thought she saw an easy solution, a way to tie up this loose end and get rid of me for good. The bait was too tempting to resist. "Where?" she demanded. I gave her the location of a specific, cavernous warehouse deep within the Packard plant complex. There was a long pause. Then her decision came, cold and final. "All right, 48 hours. Bring the book. You come alone." She hung up. I lowered the phone, my hand steady. The trap was set. The bait was taken. The clock was now ticking. All we had to do was wait for the players to walk onto our stage. The next 48 hours were the longest of my life. We stayed hidden in our concrete fortress, coordinating with the FBI through Veda's secure channel. The plan was meticulously refined. Tactical teams would be in place hours before the meet. My father and I would be wired for sound. My only role was to be the lure, to get them inside the kill box. On the night of the meet, the Packard plant was transformed. It was no longer just a ruin. It was a stage, set for the final act. I watched from a darkened window as dozens of FBI agents, ghosts in black tactical gear, moved silently into position, melting into the shadows of the surrounding buildings. They were a professional, invisible army. And for the first time in this whole ordeal, I felt like I wasn't fighting alone. I took my position in the center of the vast, cavernous warehouse we had chosen. A few bare bulbs hanging from the high ceiling cast long dancing shadows, creating a pool of weak light in an ocean of darkness. I was wearing a simple jacket and jeans, but underneath, a thin layer of soft body armor was strapped tightly to my torso. Tucked into my ear was a small receiver, and through it, the calm, steady voice of the FBI hostage rescue team commander kept me connected. "All teams are set," he murmured. "We have eyes on the target vehicle approaching from the east. Stand by for contact, Sergeant, awaiting your signal." My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the cathedral-like silence. But my hands were rock steady. My breathing was even. This feeling, the adrenaline, the heightened senses, the intense focus, it was familiar territory. This was the calm before the storm. Headlights cut through the grimy windows as Tilda's Mercedes rolled to a stop outside. A moment later, two figures stepped through a large, rusted opening in the warehouse wall. It was them. Tilda, wrapped in a fur-collared coat, her face a mask of arrogant impatience. Yale followed close behind, carrying a heavy-looking leather briefcase. Cash, the price of my silence. Their footsteps echoed as they walked toward me, their expensive shoes crunching on loose gravel and debris. They stopped about 20 feet away, their eyes scanning the dark corners of the warehouse with suspicion. "Where's the book?" Tilda demanded, her voice sharp, devoid of any pretense. I held my ground, letting the silence stretch for a beat. Then, I slowly shook my head. "There is no book." A flicker of confusion, then anger, crossed Tilda's face. "What is this? What kind of game are you playing?" "It's no game," a new voice said, calm and resonant, emerging from the deepest shadows behind me. Out of the darkness, a figure walked into the light. My father, Upton Gaff. The transformation on Tilda's face was instantaneous and absolute. Her arrogant smirk dissolved, replaced by a rictus of pure, uncomprehending horror. Her skin went pale, her eyes wide with terror, as if she were staring at a ghost risen from the grave. She physically recoiled, stumbling back a step, a strangled gasp catching in her throat. "No," she stammered, her voice a shredded whisper. "No, it can't be. You're dead." Yale was frozen solid, his jaw slack. The heavy briefcase slipped from his numb fingers and hit the concrete floor with a dead, hollow thud that echoed through the vast space. My father continued to walk slowly toward them, his presence commanding the room. He looked at the woman who had tried to murder him, and his voice was terrifyingly calm. "Hello, darling." She just kept shaking her head, her mind refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. "You're dead," she repeated, the words nonsensical, desperate. "The truth never dies, Tilda," my father said, his voice as cold and hard as the concrete beneath their feet. "Neither does your greed." That was my cue. I raised my hand to my collar, pressing the concealed microphone, and spoke the two words the entire federal task force was waiting for. My voice was clear and steady. "Target confirmed. Execute." The world exploded. In an instant, the night was obliterated. Massive, blindingly bright floodlights from every conceivable angle erupted, bathing the entire warehouse in harsh, inescapable white light. The shadows vanished. There was nowhere to hide. Simultaneously, a deafening cacophony of sirens and alarms blared to life, the sound waves physically shaking the building. The massive rolling doors at either end of the warehouse were blasted open. Teams of FBI agents in full tactical gear swarmed in from all directions, a black tide of disciplined force. Red laser dots danced across Tilda's and Yale's chests, the air filled with the deafening, overlapping shouts of command. "FBI, hands in the air, get down on the ground, now!" Tilda and Yale were completely paralyzed, caught in the blinding lights like terrified animals. All the fight drained out of them, replaced by the limp, pathetic shock of the truly defeated. They offered no resistance. Yale dropped to his knees immediately, putting his hands on his head. An agent grabbed Tilda, forcing her hands behind her back, the sharp click of the handcuffs echoing in a momentary lull. Her eyes never left my father's face. She was still babbling, the words tumbling out in a stream of insane denial. "You're dead. I was at your funeral. You're dead." Her desperate chant was answered by my father's final, powerful words. He stood over her, not with hatred, but with a profound, weary finality. "No, Tilda," he said, his voice ringing with the clear, undeniable truth. "I was just waiting for you to join me in facing justice." I stood off to the side, watching as they were led away, two pathetic, broken figures stripped of all their power and deceit. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt a deep, profound sense of release. The weight that had been pressing down on me for weeks, for years, was finally gone. The mission was over. It was a complete victory. The night of the arrest was a blur of flashing lights and official procedures. The adrenaline that had sustained me for days finally drained away, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. My father and I spent the next 8 hours in the sterile, impersonal environment of the FBI's Detroit field office. The chaos of our personal war was over, replaced by the cold, methodical process of the federal justice system. We were no longer a father and daughter fighting for survival. We were now the government's key witnesses in United States vs. Tilda Gaff and Yale Maff. We recounted the events one by one to a team of agents and an assistant U.S. attorney. Our painful family saga was transcribed, documented, and filed away as evidence. To handle our side of things, my father called in an old friend, Zan Loff, a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer who had been a federal prosecutor for 20 years before starting his own practice. Zan methodically organized our evidence, the audio recordings, the financial records from the flash drive, our sworn testimonies, transforming our story of betrayal into an airtight legal case for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, and money laundering. Handing over that flash drive felt like transferring a massive, unbearable weight from my shoulders to the broad, capable shoulders of the U.S. government. For the first time, I felt a flicker of relief. The burden of seeking justice was no longer mine alone to carry. The months leading up to the trial were a slow, grinding process of legal motions and depositions. Tilda and Yale, with their high-priced defense attorneys, tried every trick in the book. Their official narrative was that Upton Gaff was a paranoid, vindictive man, distraught over his wife leaving him, and that I was his unstable, easily manipulated daughter, using my military background to concoct a wild conspiracy. They tried to paint us as the aggressors, the villains in our own story. But their narrative crumbled in the face of cold, hard facts. The data on the flash drive was undeniable. The trial itself took place at the Theodore Levin U.S. Courthouse in downtown Detroit. The courtroom was a grand, imposing space with dark wood paneling and high ceilings, a stage for the final battle. When my father took the stand, he wasn't the broken man I'd found in the cemetery. He was composed, his voice steady. He presented the facts clearly and concisely, not as a betrayed husband, but as a witness to a crime. He laid out the timeline of their financial and psychological abuse, his testimony unshakable under cross-examination. When Dr. Veda Jaff testified, she was the embodiment of professional integrity. She explained her actions not as a conspiracy, but as an ethical and moral duty to protect a patient whose life was in imminent danger. She calmly dismantled the defense's attempts to paint her as a rogue doctor. Then it was my turn. I walked to the witness stand in my full Army service uniform. The uniform wasn't a costume, it was my armor. It represented everything Tilda hated about me. My discipline, my honor, my refusal to be what she wanted. I answered the prosecutor's questions with short, precise, factual statements. I reported what I saw, what I did, and what I found. I did not offer opinions. I did not speculate. I did not let a single flicker of personal emotion show on my face. I was a soldier, delivering my report. The week before the final verdict, a letter arrived at my father's temporary apartment. It had a prison postmark. It was from Tilda. My first instinct was to burn it unopened, but a part of me needed to know what her final move would be. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an admission of guilt. It was one last, desperate attempt at manipulation. "Maria," it began, the handwriting surprisingly neat. "You are my only hope. I know you're angry, but you must tell the judge this has all been a terrible misunderstanding, a family tragedy. I made mistakes, I know that. But everything I did was to secure a future for Brent. He needs me. Please, don't let them take me away from your brother." Brent, my older brother, the golden child, who had been living off our parents' money in California for years and hadn't even bothered to call after his father's death. Even now, facing life in prison, her only thought was for him. I was not her daughter. I was just an obstacle to her favored son's inheritance. The letter was the final, definitive piece of evidence of a truth I had known my whole life. I didn't reply. That evening, my father lit a fire in the fireplace. I walked over, crumpled the letter into a tight ball, and tossed it into the flames. We watched it turn black, curl into ash, and disappear forever. That was my final answer. The jury took less than 4 hours. The foreperson stood, cleared their throat, and read the verdict for the first count: conspiracy to commit murder. On the charge against defendant Tilda Gaff, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. A quiet gasp went through the courtroom. They read on through every single charge for both Tilda and Yale. Guilty, guilty, guilty. The judge was unsparing. Citing the calculated, cruel, and predatory nature of their crimes, he sentenced them both to 25 years in a federal penitentiary, with no possibility of parole. Justice was done. As my father and I left the courthouse, we were swarmed by a throng of reporters shouting questions. My father, standing tall and straight, leaned into a microphone and said only one thing: "The truth won today." They turned to me, cameras flashing, mics pushed into my face, but I had nothing to say. My report was complete. My testimony was given. I just walked silently through the crowd, my eyes fixed straight ahead. For me, this wasn't a victory to be celebrated with sound bites and headlines. It was just the end. The conclusion of a painful, necessary mission. I had done my duty to my father and to the truth. The final boundary had been drawn. Not by my words, not by my anger, but by the cold, hard steel of prison bars. In the months that followed the trial, the final pieces of my old life were quietly swept away. Gaff Designs, the interior design firm my father had spent his life building, was liquidated to pay off the debts Yale had accrued and the damages awarded in civil suits. The legacy he had fought so hard to protect was gone, another casualty of Tilda's greed. He didn't seem to mind. He sold the big, empty house in Grosse Pointe, taking with him only his personal tools and a few photo albums. With the small amount of money he had left, he bought a modest log cabin deep in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, a place of rugged shorelines, dense forests, and profound quiet. He found a new kind of peace there, spending his days fishing on Lake Superior and rediscovering his love for woodworking, crafting beautiful, simple furniture with his own hands. We spoke on the phone every Sunday. Our calls weren't filled with talk of the past, but of the present, the massive northern pike he'd caught, the progress on the rocking chair he was making. Our relationship, forged in the fires of betrayal and battle, had become stronger and simpler than ever, built now on a foundation of unbreakable truth and mutual respect. We didn't try to rebuild the family we had lost. We accepted what was and found a quiet happiness in what remained. Before my special leave was over, I knew there was one last thing I had to do. I drove back to Woodlawn Cemetery one final time. It was a different day entirely from the one of the funeral. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, and the late autumn sun cast a warm, golden light over the grounds. I found the place, no longer a fresh wound in the earth, but a settled patch of green. A simple, elegant granite headstone now stood in its rightful place. It read, Upton Gaff, Beloved Father. I stood before it, not as a soldier at attention, but just as a daughter. The anger and the need for vengeance had passed, leaving behind a clean, quiet ache of loss. He was truly gone now, and I could finally mourn him properly. I placed a single white carnation, his favorite, at the base of the stone. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out my unit's challenge coin, a heavy bronze disc bearing our insignia. It's a symbol of identity, of belonging, a piece of our shared honor. I pressed it firmly into the soft earth atop the grave, leaving a piece of my world with him. Mission complete, Dad, I whispered to the quiet air. You can stand down now. Rest easy. It wasn't a tearful goodbye. It was a final report, a tribute from one soldier to another. I had fought for his honor, and we had won. I stood there for a long time, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face, before turning and walking away without looking back. Returning to my base felt less like a return and more like a homecoming. As I walked into the barracks, the familiar sounds and smells of military life washed over me. The scent of cleaning solvent, the murmur of the televisions in the common room, the shouts of my platoon mates. They greeted me not with pity or invasive questions, but with the casual, unspoken camaraderie of soldiers. A solid clap on the shoulder from my platoon sergeant, a rough headlock from my squad's heavy gunner, followed by a loud, "Look what the cat dragged in." They didn't need to know the details of my war back home. They had their own wars, their own scars. All that mattered was that I was back. That night, sitting in the noisy, chaotic mess hall, surrounded by the easy laughter and crude jokes of my squad, I realized a profound truth. This was my family. Not a family bound by the complicated, messy ties of blood, but one forged in the clean, simple bonds of a shared oath. A family built on absolute trust, on the unspoken promise to have each other's back when facing down the worst the world could throw at us. Here, loyalty wasn't a choice. It was the principle of survival. I hadn't lost my family. I had finally recognized the one that had been waiting for me all along. The final scene of my leave played out on a windswept tarmac. I stood in my full combat uniform, my pack at my feet, waiting to board a C-130 transport plane. The powerful engines whined, the wind from the propellers whipping at my uniform. But I stood firm, my stance solid, my gaze fixed on the horizon. My leave was over. The war on the home front was won. Now, I was returning to the larger fight, to the purpose that had shaped me into the woman I was. I thought about the oath I took when I enlisted, the promise to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I had never imagined that my most dangerous domestic enemy would be my own mother, or that the Constitution I'd sworn to defend also guaranteed the justice my father deserved. In a way, I had been upholding my oath all along. The events of the past few months had left a scar, a permanent mark on my soul. But like the tempering of steel, the fire had also made me stronger. It had forged me into a better soldier, a woman who now understood the true weight of words like honor, truth, and loyalty. I had faced the worst kind of enemy, the kind that looks like family, and I had prevailed. The ramp of the C-130 lowered. It was time to go. As I walked toward the plane, I felt no sadness for the past, only a sharp, clear focus on the future, on the mission that lay ahead. I had survived, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that there was nothing left in this world that could ever break me again. My story is proof that the deepest wounds don't have to be the end. They can be the beginning of discovering who you were truly meant to be and who your real family is, the one you choose and the one that chooses you back. If you believe in the power of standing up and rewriting your own narrative, then this channel is for you. Please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss another story of resilience. You're not just joining a channel, you're joining a community that understands the toughest battles forge the strongest souls.